Joining me today in the Capital TV show, Bryan Leib. He's an executive director of Iranian-American for Liberty. Also, he served as the national director for Americans Against Anti-Semitism in 2018. He was a GOP-endorsed congressional candidate. How are you, Mr. Leib?
I'm good, Maria. Thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. I just read an article in Newsmax, the website. You said, as executive director of Iranian for Liberty and as a male, constantly hearing the stories of Iranian-American women whose families has experienced the regime oppression of women's rights, either directly or indirectly, through their grandmothers, mothers, aunts, is one of the reasons why we do what we do each day, to bring human rights accountability to people living in Iran. Mr. Bryan Leib, how we can bring accountability to this regime while the US administration is negotiating with?
Maria, thanks for the question. I think it's really one of the most simple and easiest things that all of us can do is collectively raise our voices, whether that's on social media, whether that's at the dinner table, at a barbecue with our friends. We have to raise our voices and we have to speak out against the atrocities that have been happening, not just for the last couple of weeks or the last couple of months, but sadly for the last couple of decades coming out of Iran. And just raise your voice, speak out about what's happening. I mean, the very fact that you have Iran being named to the United Nations Women's Commission is just purely the height of hypocrisy. We've got to raise our voices about these issues, and not just Iranian-Americans, but all Americans. All Americans should be raising their voices and speaking out against this regime that terrorizes their own people.
You said also the UN clearly failed to do its homework before making this election, considering that in Iran, women cannot apply for a passport, travel outside their home, choose where to live, or get a job without her husband, or if unmarried, her father's permission. In fact, you said also, you added, in fact, the world has recognized Iran's heinous treatment of women by placing it in the bottom percentile of countries in the world, ranking 140 out of 144 in gender parity. It's impossible, and this is it's incredible. Do you think that here in America they care about what's happening in Iran, especially against women?
I think they do. I think the everyday American, once you present the facts to them and tell them what's happening in Iran, they very much care. I mean, anyone should care. When you talk about the mere fact that a female in Iran is legally worth half of a man. In the court of law, a female is worth half of a man. So, if you present that case in a non-emotional way to females, to women here in this country, I think they'd have a really tough time, not understanding what that means. It's just a matter of getting the message out there so people really understand what's happening and understand the truth about what's happening. There's a lot of people in this country, whether they're paid or unpaid, who have made a living about, shilling for the Iranian regime and for, sharing stories about how good life is in Iran. Well, I've got news for you. I've met hundreds, if not thousands of Iranian-Americans over the last, 6, 7, 8 months. And I haven't heard that story about how life is so good back home in Iran. I've heard a lot of opposite things about how everything is always looking over your shoulder, especially if you're a female, especially if you're a member of the LGBTQ community. We've just got to keep raising our voices and exposing the truth about what's happening. And the truth is, pure facts, is that Iran oppresses their own people. They've been oppressing their own people for decades. And instead of using the millions and billions of dollars that they've received from foreign governments and also from their own revenues to help the Iranian people, they've used that money to enrich the mullahs, to enrich the 1% of that country, while also funding terrorism all around the world.
Exactly. Why do you think the UN failed in describing the real human rights problem in Iran?
The UN doesn't really make a lot of sense these days, Maria, and I think a lot of people can agree with that, regardless of what political side of the aisle that you're on. And I think it's worth pointing out as well that just last month, I remember reading a story about how Iran lost their voting rights at the United Nations because they had failed to pay 14 or $15 million of dues that all of the members have to pay. So the question has to be asked, Maria, if Iran can't pay their member dues, why do they even have a seat at the table at the United Nations? Why does the United Nations continue to prop them up? And why does the United Nations continue to target countries around the world falsely for their humanitarian rights while ignoring what's happening in Iran?
The NIC report goes on to clearly indicate, they said, we assess that Supreme Leader Khamenei authorized the campaign and Iran's military and intelligence services implemented in using overt and covert messaging and cyber operation. This is what you said in your article. There is another one titled "By Biden Lacks Wisdom to Carry Trump's Legacy Forward on Iran." Can you elaborate more why you are judging Biden and the negotiations still in the beginning? You have to be a little bit more objective.
Yeah, Maria, I'd love to be objective, but at the end of the day, the first issue that you just brought up is the fact that the National Intelligence Council here in the United States of America released a report. And in that report, it stated that Russia, China, and Iran all played a key role in election interference in the 2020 elections. So in the report, they're stated, and especially as it relates to Iran, that the leadership of Iran, the supreme leader of Iran, was the one that orchestrated and gave the green light for this covert and overt operation to happen. So the question has to be asked, why was Russia the only country that was sanctioned? If Russia, Iran, and China all are stated in this report that they interfered in our elections, shouldn't all of them be sanctioned? Why just Russia? Why ignore Iran and China? And unfortunately, I think the answer to that question is because President Biden and his team are a lot more interested in doing what they can to appease the Iranian regime instead of really pushing back. So listen, I would love to give them a shot to really kind of show us their true colors. But I think at the end of the day, President Biden and his team are full steam ahead and re-entering the JCPOA. And even more kind of alarming from my perspective is, President Biden and Rob Malley and John Kerry and this whole crew, they want to realign the Middle East. They want to realign the Middle East and make Iran America's top ally in the Middle East. Well, what about Israel? And what about Saudi Arabia? And what about the UAE? What about all these countries that have been strong allies of the United States of America for so long? And oh, by the way, have made peace through the Abraham Accords. These are very important things. And I really wish that the President Biden would be a little bit more interested in building on President Trump's overwhelming success in the Middle East instead of doing the complete opposite.
Yeah, this is what you said. Let me mention something about also dismissing the Chinese government blatant human rights violation related to the millions of Uyghurs in war camps. So why they don't take action on what's happening in China as a racism,
Yeah, I mean, it's another kind of shake your head moment, and you really just scratch your head and wonder, what's happening here. On the campaign trail, President Biden, then candidate Biden, said that what was happening with regards to the Uyghur Muslims in China was a cultural norm. Those were the words he used, cultural norm. And that, if China wants to oppress millions of Muslims, hey guys, that's just a cultural norm and we shouldn't get involved with it. Really? A cultural norm to put millions of people in work camps? I'm sorry, I don't buy that.
Even the Houthis, they killed the 400 Ethiopian and they burned them in front of everyone and no action was taken.
Well, no, Maria, just to jump in, there was an action that was taken with regards to the Houthis, but it wasn't what you're talking about.
They took them out
you know,
from the terror list, yeah.
I mean, again, what is happening here? The U.S. State Department is taking the Houthi rebels off of the FTO list. I mean, it's almost like they're emboldening them to hit our allies harder and harder. As they took the Houthis off of the FTO list, they were launching rockets into Saudi Arabia. So, you know, if I'm the Saudis, I'm looking at that and I'm saying to myself, well, I guess the new president of the United States puts a lot more, or wants to build a relationship with the Houthis, the rebels, instead of us, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So, I mean, you just really can't understand, you know, what President Biden continues to do over and over and over again. But as I said when we first started talking, I think it all ties into his strategy of appeasing the Iranian regime and doing whatever he can to get the U.S. back into the JCPOA and to realign the region to the benefit of Iran, and that's a big mistake.
An article in New York Times says fierce foes, Iran and Saudi Arabia, secretly explore diffusing tensions talks between the two region powers. If successful, could start to lower the temperature on several conflicts across the Middle East. What is your opinion on this matter?
I think we're going to have to take a wait and see approach to this. I mean, I'm certainly all for any kind of peace, but I'm certainly a little weary of seeing Iran and Saudi Arabia get together because, I mean, let's be honest, they're on polar opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to a lot of things, from politically to ideological type things. And listen, at the end of the day, I'm all for any countries making peace with any other countries. I just think that when it comes to the Iranian regime, they have a track record of doing one thing and then 2 minutes later doing the complete opposite thing. Listen, I would love to be able to tell you, Maria, that I think the Iranian regime can be trusted. But from my perspective, I don't know how you can trust them.
I mean, are we nearing a stage where Iran and Saudi Arabia are able to begin a real negotiation that end to something that end, as you said, you are a man who admire peace. So do you think that Iran will stop doing all they are doing and become a natural, normal country?
Not going to happen. I mean, they haven't changed their tune once since 1979, whether it's death to America, death to Israel. They haven't changed their tune. I mean, they keep going back to the same page and the same playbook over and over and over again. I mean, they've been funding. Who do you think funds the Houthi rebels? Probably the Iranian regime. And is it not the Houthi rebels that are the ones that are launching rockets into Saudi Arabia? So, I mean, again, if I'm Saudi Arabia, I'm very weary of Iran wanting to sit down and have conversations with us. But at the end of the day, that's up for those two governments to decide what is in the best interest of their people. I can just say, as an outsider looking in, that Saudi Arabia should be very careful, and I'm sure they know this, should be very careful in any kind of negotiations with Iran, because the Iranian regime can't be trusted. That's a fact. They just can't be trusted.
I'll ask you a quick question about His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, and US President Joe Biden discussed in a phone call the historic ties and strategic partnership between the two friendly countries and ways to enhance them in various fields. How do you describe this relationship? How do you see it?
Well, I think the United States of America and the UAE have a long-standing relationship that certainly will continue after the Biden administration, and it's been there before the Biden administration. So I think and I hope that relationship continues to grow and continues to blossom. There's so many fantastic things that are coming out of the UAE. We, the United States of America, would be wise to want to partner with the UAE. I know that we recently gave the green light to sell F-35s to the UAE, and I fully support that. The UAE has shown the world that they are a peace-loving nation that wants to support their allies and wants to enrich and support their own people. I think I would have a much different tune if a government was selling F-35 fighter jets to the Iranian regime, because we know what they're going to do with that. We know what they're going to do with that type of weaponry. versus the UAE is just they're a model for what a lot of countries in the Middle East should be. And I have to give a lot of kudos and a lot of credit to the leadership of the UAE for really, coming together with these Abraham Accords and making peace with Israel. It's absolutely amazing. I hear of so many friendships that are blossoming between the Emirati people and the Israeli people. But also, let's be honest and let's put our cards on the table, Maria. That happened because of the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords happened because of President Trump. So, President Biden doesn't like to use the word Abraham Accords. His State Department refers to them as normalization agreements. No, it's the Abraham Accords.
What is the difference?
The difference is Abraham Accords is giving credit to President Trump. And they don't want to give any credit to President Trump, so they're not going to call it the Abraham Accords. They're just going to call them normalization agreements, which is what the Abraham Accords are 100%.
Can I go back to the conversation between Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed and President Biden? Sheikh Mohammed tackled cooperation in the field of clean, renewable energy, environmental protection, facing climate change, and the importance of enhancing international efforts in this field. In light of the results of and commitments of Leaders Summit on Climate held recently, how do you think UAE succeeded to establish an important job and an important work in this field?
Well, I think it took bold leadership, and it took really looking at what the future of the country could be, and I think the UAE decided that the future was not going to be just oil, and that it was going to be in a lot of these other fields that you just mentioned. They have already, the UAE has already started making major contributions all throughout the world, in the medical field, in the energy field, and I hope they continue to. And we desperately need people and need countries like the UAE that are deciding to put aside decades long differences with their neighbors and to come together for peace. I give the leadership and Sheikh Mohammed all the credit in the world. A fantastic job for executing on that bold leadership, because I'm sure a lot of people, probably thought that they could just sit on the oil and that would be fine, and maybe it would have been. But I think we're seeing that the UAE is completely just transforming, and it's beautiful to see. Hopefully, one day, Maria, I'll be blessed to travel to the UAE. I would love to be there one day.
Inshallah, we hope so, and I know that they will welcome you. Mr. Bryan Leib, I want to thank you so much, Executive Director of Iranian-Americans for Liberty. Thank you for showing up in my Capital TV show.
Maria, thank you very much. And just in closing, I just want to say that everyone has to raise their voices. You have to raise your voices, whether it's online, whether it's in person, whether it's writing letters to the editor, op-eds, going on TV. You have to do whatever you can. All of the American people need to be pushing back against the Iranian regime. This is a regime that chants death to America. They've been doing it for 30 years. Well, guess what? They want death to America. So we need to push back. We need to speak the truth. And Maria, thank you again for having me on. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure.
We don't have to forget, their bad intuition on USA, and freedom is what the USA is made for, no?
Freedom and liberty.
Exactly. Thank you so much, and hope to see you in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.